Good morning, students. Today we are going to deal with the new chapter, The Argumentative Indian, written by Amartya Sen. Few brief note about what Amartya Sen wanted to talk in this chapter. Argumentative Indian is a collection of essays by Amartya Sen. He is an economist and Nobel Prize winner. It focuses on the argumentative history of India. From the epics, the argumentative tradition is traced out from the argument of Krishna and Arjuna that is quoted in Bhagavad Gita. Argumentative Indian, we can see that Sen in his essay talks about the word heterodoxy. That is, his first essay in this collection is titled as Argumentative Indian, which comes under the broader heading Voice and Heterodoxy. This essay explains in detail about the contemporary India, that is, in the year 2005. The subtitle of this book is Writing on Indian Culture, History and Identity. Sen argues in this essay that in India there has been a long tradition of questioning the truth of ideas through discussion and dialogue. We can also see here, students, that his argument was not that it was not there before, but he is trying to give you some kind of an explanation with talking about prolixity. He starts itself with a quote, "Prolixity is not aligned to us in India." He tells us about the dialogue and significance. He talks about the Krishnan Menon's longest speech. You must be knowing who is Krishnan Menon. He was India's defense minister from 1967 to 1962. He led the Indian delegation to the United Nations, and on 23rd January 1957 delivered an unprecedented 9-hour speech defending India's stand on Kashmir. We have further talking about dialogue and significance, and we also have gender, caste and voice, and we can see that what Sen wants to talk about in this chapter. It gives you a clear explanation about democracy as public reasoning, understanding secularism, skeptics, agnostics and atheists. He talks about science, epistemology and heterodoxy. He talks about the importance of arguments. So, well, students, these are the things that is there in the chapter. I have divided into three topic wise so that it will be easy for you to learn. First slide gives you a little explanation, and then the next slide further explanation, and the next slide with the rest of the explanation, and that's how we are going to complete the chapter. Here it gives you some information about him, about Amartya Sen, how he served as a professor at various universities like Delhi University, the London School of Economics, and we can also see All Souls College in Oxford and Harvard University. He is now the Master of Trinity College at Cambridge University. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work on welfare economics. He is also a great philosopher and intellectual of present generation. He wrote hundreds of thought-provoking essays in various Indian and international journals and newspapers. His scholarly books are priceless documents of an intellectual iconistic ideas. Now, the question arises here in this particular chapter, why be argumentative? He started the chapter with a quote, "Prolixity is not aligned to us in India." He also talks about the length the lengthiest speech of Krishna Menon's record of the longest speech ever delivered at the United Nations, that is 9 hours non-stop, established half a century ago. This is what he was trying to tell here, and he tells that the arguments are also often enough substantive. He talks about the famous Bhagavad Gita, which is one small section of the Mahabharata, presents a tussle between two contrary moral positions. Sen tells us that the admiration for the Gita and the Krishna's argument in particularly has been lasting phenomenon in parts of European culture. He emphasizes on doing one's duty on one side and Arjuna's focus on avoiding bad consequences on the other. There remains a powerful case for the lesson which is said, faring well and not just forward. It just tells you about Krishna's moral position that has also been eloquently endorsed by many philosophical and literary commentators across the world, such as Christopher and T.S. Eliot. We can see that in fact he has translated the Bhagavad Gita into English. Now, what this chapter talks about, we can also see that sense argument was whether it was positive or negative. Argumentation is positive and often substantive, that is what I have explained. And he talks about not a new concept of to India at all. Argument was there even before. People used to always gather in groups. They used to have a lot of discussion. The questioning and argument is an integral part of Sanskrit epics. He talks about Gita, an excellent example of argumentation and even public discussion, etc. in political that leads to strengthening democracy. Discussion and arguments are a critical important for democracy and public reasoning. He says that they are the central to the practice of secularism and for even-handed treatment of adherents of different religions, faith, including those who have no religious beliefs, if you are even an atheist. It says that going beyond these basic structural priorities, the argumentative tradition, if used with deliberations and commitment, can also be extremely important in resisting social inequalities and in removing poverty and deprivation. He tells us here that the Vedas are full of hymns, religious invocations, but they also tell us stories. They speculate about the world and the true to the argumentative propensity already in view. Ask difficult questions. He says that it's a very basic doubt concerns the very creation of the world. Did someone make it? He talks to you here and tells about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. He says definitely they are the great epics. He says that he recalls this with so much of joy, how his life was, very much enriched when he encountered them first as restless youngsters looking for intellectual stimulations as well as a sheer entertainment. Now, here we can see that Amartya Sen, he wanted to talk about how the traditions of public reasoning is closely related to the roots of democracy across the globe. He tells us that when independent India became the first country in the non-Western world and how absolutely democratic constitution, like it is not used when it had learned from the institutional experiences in Europe and America. We can see that he says in this chapter that public reasoning, he says, includes the opportunity for citizens to participate in political discussions. He tells that, and it's not to influence public choice. We can look further and see that to make public discussions effective, when the opportunity to vote is combined, when the opportunity to speak and listen without fear. The chapter also talks to us about how Sen encounters masses of arguments and counter arguments. He says how they spread over incessant debates and disputations. Well, students, these are the few statements that I have explained just before in the previous slide. You can see this statement and you can understand like what Sen wanted to convey it to you through this chapter. We can also see here, students, that how he has emphasized on certain things like the arguments. He says about the famous Bhagavad Gita, which is one small section of the Mahabharata, presents the tussle between two contrary moral positions. I am repeating the points because you can jot down from your textbook itself. He is talking about the admiration for the Gita and the Krishna's argument, and he is also emphasizing that one should do one's duty on one side, and how Arjuna focuses on avoiding bad consequences on the other. He talks about Krishna's moral position has also been eloquently endorsed by many philosophical and literary commentators across the world. He tries to tell us that by further explaining about the famous Bhagavad Gita. This is the locations of Indians. He is talking about the famous Bhagavad Gita, which is one section of the Mahabharata, how it presents a tussle between two contrary moral positions. Krishna's emphasis on doing one's duty, which I have already explained to you, talks about Arjuna's focus on avoiding bad consequences. He is talking here about watching the two armies readying for war. Profound doubts about the correctness of what they are doing are raised by Arjuna, the peerless and invincible warrior in the army of just and honorable royal family. The royal family, the Pandavas, were about to fight the unjust, usurpers, that is the Kauravas. Arjuna's question whether it was right to be concerned only with one's duty, or whether we should promote a cause and be indifferent to the misery and the slaughter, even of one's skin. He talks about the war itself that would undoubtedly cause Krishna, who is a divine incarnation in the form of human being. He argues against Arjuna. He tells you here the responses takes the form of articulating principles of action based on the priority of doing one's duty, which have been repeated again and again in Indian philosophy. The chapter talks to you about how Arjuna questions whether it is right to be concerned only with one's duty. You have in page number 177 in Dialogue and Significance, which I am explaining. He says that it is a just cause, and as a warrior and a general on whom his side must be relay, Arjuna cannot waver from his obligation no matter what the consequences are. He talks about Krishna's moral position that has also been eloquently endorsed by many philosophical and literary commentators across the world, which I previously mentioned again, that is such as Christopher Isherwood and T.S. Eliot. Isherwood, in fact, translated the Bhagavad Gita into English. We know the admiration for the Gita and for Krishna's argument in particular that has been lasting in the phenomenon in parts of European culture. We can also see that it was spectacularly praised in the early 19th century. We can look here and see that how Sen tries to explain and tells us that through the lines, that is, there remains a powerful case for faring well and not just forward. This line tells you about this line further explains, telling that there remains a powerful case for faring well and not just forward. It talks about J. Robert Oppenheimer, the leader of the American team that developed the ultimate weapon of mass destruction during the Second World War. It tells you here about how it was moved to quote Krishna's word, I become death, the destroyer of worlds. All this line, what I am explaining, is in page number 178, and it tells you about as he watched on 16th July 1945 the awesome force of the first nuclear explosion devised by man, like the advice that Arjuna had received about his duty as a warrior fighting for a just cause. Oppenheimer, the physicist, could well find justification in his technical commitment to develop a bomb for what was clearly the right side, scrutinizing, indeed criticizing his own action. Oppenheimer said later on, when you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it. And you argue about what to do about it only after you have had your technical success. So we can see here, despite that compulsion to fare forward, there was a reason also for reflecting on Arjuna's concern. How can good come from killing so many people? This is what he questions, and he says that how do you say by killing so many people that we are doing good? And why should I seek victory by killing all those people? He says that kingdom or happiness for my own side. These arguments also remain thoroughly relevant in this contemporary world. The case for doing this, for doing what one sees as one's duty, must be strong. But how can we be different to the consequences that may follow from doing what we take to be our just duty? As we reflect on the manifest problems of our global world, from terrorism, wars, we can see that violence, we can see epidemics. He's talking and mentioning all that. This is there in page number 179. He says that it is important to take on board Arjuna's consequential analysis in addition to considering Krishna's argument for doing one's duty. Further sense says that a defeated argument that refuses to be obliterated can remain very alive. Does the richness of tradition of argument make much difference to such kind of continental lives today? He says, I would argue it does, and in a great many different ways. It shapes our social world and the nature of our culture. It has also helped to make heterodoxy, the arguments, the natural state of affairs in India. More on this, persistent arguments are an important part of our public life. Sometimes, students, until we argue, we don't get the correct answer. You should also have curiosity in you to know. That is why we have so many debates and all, which gives the analysis of what exactly one wanted to convey. It deeply influences Indian politics, that which you must have watched in many of the news channel, like how they deal with different topics, and is also very particular relevant. I would argue to the development of democracy in India and the emergence of its secular priorities. He talks about the relevance of the argumentative traditions would be severely limited if disadvantaged sections were effectively barred from participation. He says that if people don't come with their opinions and thoughts, then it would be very difficult. Even if you go back all the way, and when we look back to the ancient India, some of the most celebrated dialogues have, he had been talking about women, with the sharpest questioning which came from women interlocutors. This can be traced back even to the Upanishads, the dialectical treatises that were composed from about 18th century BCE, and which are often taken to be foundations of Hindu philosophy. Now, in the next slide, I'll be explaining to you further about it.